Calling the police. You look suspicious.
You mean I look black?
Maybe.
Well, then you've got the police chief with you, and you're in big trouble.
I already told you, you don't belong here. The police are on their way to remove you and this junk. Excellent. Please ensure they activate their body cameras upon arrival. The procedure will be educational. Incident Report 812-C. Date, October 14th. Location, the Summit Estates, a high net worth gated community. The event documents a trespassing report motivated by racial bias, initiated by the HOA president, Karen Peterson. The target of the report was Dr. Marcus Vance, the city's newly appointed chief of police, who was supervising the move into his new residence. The outcome resulted in the immediate removal of the HOA president, a civil settlement of $450,000, and criminal charges for filing a false report and racial discrimination. This is the chronological record of a life's implosion, caused by a single, unthinking act of prejudice. The day began with the quiet, organized hum of a life in transition. At precisely 9:17 a.m. on a crisp Saturday morning, the air in the Summit Estates was still and smelled of freshly cut grass and chlorine from meticulously maintained swimming pools. This was a world of silent electric golf carts, perfectly manicured hedges, and a pervasive sense of insulated order. Here, anything out of the ordinary was not just noticed, it was scrutinized. Dr. Marcus Vance stood on the pristine cobblestone driveway of his new $2.2 million home, a modern architectural statement of glass and steel that stood in stark contrast to the more traditional Tuscan-style villa surrounding it. Dressed in a simple navy blue polo shirt and khaki pants, he held a digital tablet, cross-referencing a detailed inventory list with the items being carefully unloaded from a state-of-the-art moving truck. His focus was absolute. He was not Chief Vance, the decorated officer with a doctorate in criminology and a career built on de-escalation tactics and data-driven policing. He was simply Marcus, a homeowner ensuring his collection of antique maps and first edition books was handled with the care it deserved. He spoke in quiet, measured tones to the moving crew foreman, pointing out the precise placement for a heavy oak desk, his instructions clear and concise. The scene was one of complete and utter normalcy, a domestic tableau of a family setting down new roots. The fluorescent lights of the moving truck's interior flickered over boxes labeled kitchen and study, each one sealed with color-coded tape, a system of his own design. This level of meticulous organization was a hallmark of his character, a trait that had served him well in a career where details could mean the difference between life and death. But in this sanitized suburban paradise, his very presence was about to be logged as a threat. The disturbance arrived at 9:22 a.m., not with a siren, but with the determined, rhythmic clicking of expensive athletic shoes on pavement. Karen Peterson, in her official capacity as president of the Homeowners Association and her unofficial role as the arbiter of the community's unwritten social code, was making her morning rounds. Her gaze, sharp and critical, swept across the moving truck, the crew in their uniforms, and finally settled on the one element her mind flagged as a dangerous anomaly: a black man in a position of authority. The community's high-definition CCTV camera, mounted discreetly on a decorative lamppost, captures what happened next. Her approach was direct, her body language a study in aggressive entitlement. She did not offer a welcome or an introduction. Instead, she stopped a few feet from Dr. Vance, hands on her hips, and immediately launched her interrogation. She demanded to see his work order, her tone implying he was a foreman who had somehow breached the community's stringent vendor protocols. Dr. Vance looked up from his tablet, his expression unreadable. He calmly informed her that he was the new homeowner, his voice a placid baritone that carried no hint of irritation. This simple statement of fact was something Karen Peterson's entire worldview was unprepared to process. A flicker of disbelief, then outright derision, crossed her face. The camera's microphone, sensitive enough to capture the rustling of leaves, clearly recorded her sneering reply. She told her she knew the type of people who lived here and that he, quite clearly, did not fit the profile. She demanded identification to prove his residency, a demand she had no legal right to make. Dr. Vance's response was a masterclass in strategic inaction. He simply declined, stating that he was not required to present his personal documents to her. His refusal was not aggressive, it was a quiet, firm boundary. For Karen, this calm defiance was more infuriating than any argument. Frustrated by a composure she couldn't break, Karen Peterson reached into her purse for her phone. She was about to make a 911 call, a decision that would meticulously document her own downfall and cost her everything she had. The 911 call, initiated at precisely 9:28 a.m., was not an act of panic but a calculated weaponization of emergency services. The audio log, later entered as documentary evidence B, captures Karen Peterson's voice, a carefully modulated performance of a damsel in distress facing an imminent threat. She reported a trespasser, but her description was a tapestry woven from racial stereotypes, designed to elicit a rapid and forceful police response. She used words like aggressive, intimidating, and suspicious to paint a picture of Dr. Vance that bore no resemblance to the man standing motionless on the driveway. To the dispatcher, she claimed he was casing the property, possibly part of a larger ring of thieves targeting the affluent community, a narrative she invented on the spot. She insisted he was refusing to cooperate, a deliberate mischaracterization of his calm refusal to submit to her illegal demands for identification. When the dispatcher asked if he was armed, Karen paused for a beat, a moment of theatrical consideration before saying, "I can't be sure. He has his hands in his pockets," a complete fabrication, as Dr. Vance's arms were clearly crossed over his chest. Throughout the 4-minute, 12-second call, Dr. Vance did not move. His posture remained relaxed. His training as a law enforcement professional, honed over 2 decades of high-stakes encounters, had taken over. He recognized this moment for what it was, the creation of a pristine, unbiased evidentiary record. Her words, her tone, her fabrications were all being permanently logged by a third-party system. He knew that any reaction from him, a raised voice, an angry gesture, even a step forward, would be used by her to validate her false narrative. So he did nothing. He became a passive observer of his own character assassination, understanding that her every lie was another nail in the coffin of her credibility. The moving crew had ceased their work, their expressions a mixture of confusion and apprehension. They stood by their truck, silent witnesses to a confrontation they did not understand but instinctively knew was deeply wrong. Their foreman, a man named Dave, made eye contact with Dr. Vance, a silent question in his eyes. Dr. Vance gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a signal to stand down and let the events unfold as they must. The entire scene was being captured by the HOA's own security system, the lens of the camera an unblinking, impartial eye documenting Karen's escalating hysteria against a backdrop of his unnerving stillness. Ending the call, Karen Peterson's demeanor shifted from feigned fear to triumphant arrogance. She pocketed her phone, a smirk playing on her lips. She believed she had won. The full weight of the law was now bearing down on this man who had dared to defy her, and she savored the impending vindication. She turned back to Dr. Vance, her voice dripping with condescension. "You see what happens when you don't follow the rules?" she said, her tone that of a teacher scolding a disobedient child. "All you had to do was show me your papers, but your kind always has to make things difficult. It's a simple request, but you chose this." Her words hung in the quiet air, a raw and unfiltered display of her prejudice. Dr. Vance's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were analytical, cataloging her every word, every micro-expression. He offered one final calm statement, not as a plea, but as a professional courtesy. "Ma'am," he said, his voice level and devoid of emotion, "for your own sake, I would strongly advise you to retract your statement to the dispatcher when the officers arrive. There are serious legal consequences for filing a false report. This quiet, logical warning was the one thing she could not tolerate. To her ears, it sounded like a threat, a final desperate act of defiance from a cornered criminal. Her face, already flushed, turned a deep shade of crimson. "A threat?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Now you're threatening me? I am a pillar of this community. I am the president of the HOA. The officers will see exactly what you are." She was performing now for an unseen audience whose curtains were beginning to twitch. Dr. Vance offered no verbal reply. He simply held her gaze, his silence a more powerful rebuttal than any argument. It was the silence of a man who held all the cards, waiting patiently for the game to play out. Then, the faint, unmistakable wail of a siren cut through the morning calm. It grew louder, closer, the sound echoing off the stucco walls of the multi-million-dollar homes. For Karen, it was the soundtrack of her victory. She smiled, a wide, predatory grin, as the flashing red and blue lights of a patrol car swept across her face. The authorities had arrived to restore order, her order. She had no way of knowing they were actually arriving to document her complete and total ruin. What would you have done in Dr. Vance's position? Would you have been able to maintain that level of calm? Let us know in the comments below. Karen Peterson's reality, a fragile construct built upon a foundation of unchallenged authority and racial hierarchy, simply could not accommodate Dr. Vance's calm refusal. In her mind, his composure was not a sign of discipline, but an act of profound insolence. It was a direct assault on her position as the arbiter of who belonged and who did not. The high-definition lens of the community's surveillance camera, designated as Documentary Evidence A, continued its silent, impartial recording as her expression tightened into a mask of vindictive purpose. She reached into her expensive leather handbag and produced her smartphone, her movements sharp and theatrically deliberate. This was not an act of fear. It was the deployment of a weapon she had used before. At precisely 9:28 a.m., she initiated a 911 call, a step that irrevocably transformed her from a neighborhood nuisance into a criminal. The official audio log of that call, later entered into court records as Documentary Evidence B, serves as a 4-minute, 12-second dissertation on malicious fabrication. Her voice, carefully modulated to sound like a frantic and terrified victim, reported a highly dangerous and suspicious individual who had breached the secure perimeter. She wove a narrative of pure fiction, describing the perfectly still Dr. Vance with a vocabulary drawn from a deep reservoir of racial stereotypes. She used the words aggressive, intimidating, and menacing to paint a picture of an imminent threat for the dispatcher, insisting he was casing the property. When asked the critical question of whether he was armed, she paused for dramatic effect, a calculated moment of performance, before lying outright. "I can't be sure," she whispered into the phone. "He's posturing. He won't show me his hands." All the while, the CCTV footage shows Dr. Vance standing motionless, his arms calmly crossed over his chest, a pillar of unnerving stillness amidst her manufactured storm. His 2 decades in law enforcement had trained him for this exact scenario. He understood that his greatest weapon was his own composure. Every lie she uttered was being permanently and officially recorded. Every exaggerated claim was another piece of irrefutable evidence that would dismantle her life. He was not just enduring her attack, he was actively supervising the meticulous documentation of his own vindication. The moving crew, silent witnesses to the unfolding injustice, had stopped their work entirely, their faces a mixture of confusion and apprehension. Karen ended the call with a palpable sense of triumph. The system she believed existed solely to serve and protect her was now in motion. The call was logged, the units were dispatched, the police were on their way, and she had just handed them everything they needed to destroy her. The wail of the siren, growing from a distant annoyance to an imminent authoritative presence, was the symphony Karen Peterson had been waiting for. For her, it was not a sound of alarm, but of vindication, the triumphant fanfare announcing the restoration of her world's proper order. At precisely 9:35 a.m., Patrol Car Unit 714, a gleaming Ford Police Interceptor utility, turned onto the cobblestone street, its red and blue lights painting silent, strobing patterns across the manicured lawns and pristine stucco facades. It slowed to a professional crawl and stopped directly in front of the property. The sight of the official vehicle sent a fresh wave of smug satisfaction through Karen. Her performance had worked, the system was responding. Two officers, a tall, stern-faced man later identified as Officer Davis, and a younger, more athletic officer named Chen, exited the vehicle. Their movements were economical and practiced, their expressions neutral. Small black boxes mounted on their chests, the lenses of their body cameras were already active, their unblinking red lights silently recording what would become documentary evidence C and D. Before they could even fully assess the scene, Karen descended upon them, a whirlwind of manufactured distress. She pointed a trembling finger at Dr. Vance, who had not moved an inch. "That's him, officer," she declared, her voice pitched to convey maximum victimhood. "He's trespassing, he refuses to identify himself, and he threatened me when I told him I was calling you." She had delivered her lines perfectly. Officer Davis gave her a curt nod, a practiced gesture meant to acknowledge but not validate, and then turned his full attention to the man she had accused. He approached Dr. Vance with a measured gait, maintaining a professional distance. His training dictated his actions, establish a baseline, de-escalate if necessary, and ascertain the facts. His body camera captured his calm, procedural tone. "Sir, good morning. I'm Officer Davis. We received a call regarding a possible trespasser at this address. Could you please provide me with some form of identification?" This was the moment of Karen's ultimate triumphs, the checkmate she had engineered. She watched, a predatory grin spreading across her face as Dr. Vance finally moved. He gave a slow, deliberate nod to the officer. Without a word, he reached into the back pocket of his khaki pants. Karen's grin widened. She expected a frayed wallet, a reluctant surrender. Instead, he produced a polished black leather billfold, flipping it open with an active flick of his wrist. Inside, nestled against pristine credentials, was not a driver's license, but a polished, seven-pointed gold star badge bearing the city. He didn't just show it to Officer Davis, he handed the entire credential case over. The morning sun caught the polished gold, making it flare for a moment in the camera's lens. Officer Davis took the case, his eyes scanning the ID card, the official photograph, the name, Dr. Marcus Vance, and below it, the title that instantly vaporized the entire premise of the 911 call, Chief of Police. The body cam footage registers a microsecond of absolute stillness from Officer Davis. His training, which had prepared him for thousands of potential scenarios, had no protocol for this. The mental flowchart for a trespassing call instantly dissolved. His entire posture underwent a seismic shift. His back straightened, his shoulders squared, and the professional distance he had maintained was replaced by an unmistakable attitude of hierarchical respect. He looked up from the credentials, his eyes meeting Dr. Vance's, and for the first time, he saw not a suspect, but his own commanding officer. The color drained from his face. He snapped the credential case shut and handed it back with a reverence one might reserve for a loaded weapon. His partner, Officer Chen, seeing the profound change in his partner's demeanor, took a step back, his own face a mask of confusion and dawning alarm. The power on the pristine cobblestone driveway had not just shifted, it had inverted with the force of a tectonic event. If you felt that surge of satisfaction at the exact moment the badge was revealed, hit the like button and subscribe right now, because you do not want to miss the detailed, documented implosion of Karen's life that comes next. The body cam footage from Officer Davis, designated Documentary Evidence C, captures the precise moment the world order inverted on that pristine cobblestone driveway. His eyes, trained to read threats and assess situations in fractions of a second, widened almost imperceptibly as they processed the name and title on the credentials. The audio feed picks up a sharp, involuntary intake of breath. For 7.2 seconds, Officer Davis was completely still, his entire being locked in a state of cognitive recalibration. The man before him was not a suspect. He was the ultimate authority. He was the new chief. This silent, seismic shift was entirely lost on Karen Peterson. Her entire reality was predicated on the belief that she was in the right, that her perception was the only one that mattered. When she saw Officer Davis's momentary paralysis, she misinterpreted it not as shock and dawning horror, but as confusion. She saw it as an opportunity to reassert her narrative. She took a step forward, her voice rising in pitch, becoming sharp and accusatory. "What is that? Some kind of fake ID?" she demanded, her finger jabbing the air towards Dr. Vance. "Are you kidding me? You can buy those things on the internet." "Officer, you cannot possibly be falling for this. He's a criminal trying to intimidate you. Do your job." Her tirade was a catastrophic miscalculation. She was no longer just filing a false report. She was now actively accusing a sworn officer of incompetence and complicity in front of his own commanding officer. Officer Chin, who had been observing from a slight distance, immediately recognized the situation had spiraled beyond their pay grade. His body cam, documentary evidence D, shows him turning away slightly, bringing his radio to his lips. His voice was low but clear, a stark contrast to Karen's shrieking. "Dispatch, Unit 714, he said, his words clipped and professional. "Requesting a supervisor respond to our current location. We have a sensitive situation involving a potential 148.5 and a Code 10 official." The use of police code was deliberate, a way to communicate the gravity without further inflaming the civilian on scene. A 148.5 was the code for a false police report. A Code 10 was an internal designation for a high-ranking officer. The dispatcher's reply was immediate. "Copy 714, supervisor en route. ETA, 3 minutes." The 3 minutes that followed were a masterclass in psychological tension. Dr. Vance remained impassive, a statue of patience. The officers stood their ground, their posture rigid, their faces unreadable masks of professionalism. The movers had retreated to the cab of their truck. The only movement was Karen Peterson, who paced back and forth on the driveway, muttering about lawsuits and incompetence, her self-righteous fury blinding her to the legal abyss she had just opened beneath her own feet. The sound of a second siren, this one with a deeper, more authoritative tone, cut through her ranting. A black and white supervisor sedan glided to a stop behind the first patrol car. For Karen, it was the arrival of a senior manager who would surely understand her side of the story. She had no idea she had just successfully summoned her own executioner. The officer who emerged from the supervisor's vehicle was Captain Frank Rodriguez, a 25-year veteran with silver-streaked hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His body cam, which would become documentary evidence E, activated the moment he opened his door. He was the commander of this entire patrol division, a man who had seen everything the city had to offer. His initial assessment of the scene was swift. 2 of his junior officers looking unusually tense, an agitated civilian woman, and the new chief of police standing on a driveway. Rodriguez's mind processed the scene in an instant, and he knew with the certainty of a career lawman that this was not a standard call. He strode forward, his gaze fixed entirely on Dr. Vance, completely ignoring Karen Peterson as if she were a piece of lawn furniture. His approach was direct, his posture immediately communicating deference and respect. He stopped a few feet away and rendered a crisp, formal nod. "Chief," he said, his voice a powerful baritone that carried across the entire street, silencing Karen mid-sentence. "Captain Rodriguez, welcome to the neighborhood. I wasn't aware you were moving into my division. Is there a problem here I can assist with?" That single, public, and unequivocal acknowledgement was the kill shot. It was the irrefutable third-party validation that vaporized every last shred of Karen Peterson's credibility. The body cam footage from Officer Davis provides a devastating close-up of her face at that exact moment. The smug certainty drained away, replaced by a wave of slack-jawed disbelief, followed by the dawning, sickly pallor of absolute dread. The world she had constructed, a world in which she was the hero and he was the villain, had just been publicly and officially annihilated. Dr. Vance finally responded, his tone still even as if discussing a minor logistical issue. "Captain," he said, acknowledging Rodriguez with a slight nod, "thank you. This woman, identifying herself as the HOA president, reported me as a trespasser at my own residence. Officers Davis and Chen were responding to her call." He presented the facts without emotion, without accusation, letting their simple weight do the work. Captain Rodriguez listened, his eyes narrowing slightly as he absorbed the full, toxic implication of the scene. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, and finally fixed his gaze on Karen Peterson. His expression was no longer that of a community peacekeeper. It was the cold, analytical look of an officer about to make an arrest. "Ma'am," he stated, his voice devoid of any warmth, "for the record, you have just filed a demonstrably false police report against the chief of police for this city. You have made accusations against my officers. You are being officially detained as part of a criminal investigation. I strongly advise you to remain silent." His words were not a request, they were a verdict. The movers, sensing the finality of the moment, quietly opened the back of their truck and began to unload the first box onto the driveway, a simple act that declared with absolute certainty who belonged and whose world had just come to a complete and documented end. The implosion of Karen Peterson's life was not a chaotic, fiery event, but a cold, systematic dismantling, executed with the procedural precision of a legal demolition. The evidence, captured by no fewer than 5 separate recording devices, formed an inescapable digital cage from which there was no appeal and no escape. The consequences began before Captain Rodriguez's sedan had even left the cobblestone street. She was formally charged under California Penal Code 148.5, filing a false report, a misdemeanor that, while minor on its own, acted as the legal gateway to her ruin. More significantly, the district attorney's office, armed with the pristine body cam footage and the crystal clear audio of her 911 call, immediately opened an investigation into a violation of the Ralph Civil Rights Act, a state law that provides for civil and criminal penalties against anyone who uses threats or intimidation based on race. The administrative fallout was even faster. The Summit Estates HOA board convened an emergency session via Zoom that very evening. The motion to remove her as president was tabled within the first 5 minutes. The evidence, a password-protected link to the unedited CCTV footage, was all that was needed. The vote was a merciless 6-0, with Karen herself being the only absent member. Her immediate removal also stripped her of the waived monthly association dues, a benefit valued at exactly $8,500 annually, which she was now required to pay effective immediately, adding insult to her institutional injury. 2 weeks later, the civil complaint landed. Dr. Vance's legal team, a top-tier firm specializing in civil rights litigation, filed a lawsuit alleging defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and racial discrimination. The community, desperate to avoid the public relations nightmare of a discovery process and trial that would expose their internal politics and potentially depress property values, pressured the HOA's insurance carrier to settle. The final settlement agreement was for the sum of $450,000. The terms stipulated that Peterson was personally liable for the first $100,000 of the deductible, with the HOA's insurer covering the remaining $350,000. In a final act of quiet integrity, Dr. Vance publicly announced that his entire portion of the settlement would be donated to the Urban League to fund scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing careers in law enforcement.
masterfully transforming her act of hate into a force for positive change. The professional repercussions were just as devastating. Karen Peterson was a licensed wealth management advisor, a career built on a fragile foundation of trust and reputation. A client, upon seeing the local news report, filed a formal complaint with the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA. The complaint cited conduct unbecoming of a fiduciary, arguing that an individual who exhibits such profound and documented prejudice cannot be trusted to manage assets for a diverse clientele without bias. FINRA launched a formal investigation, and within 3 months, her license was suspended pending a full hearing, effectively terminating her career. Her firm, a prestigious brokerage in the city, had already terminated her employment for cause, citing a violation of their public code of conduct, costing her an annual salary of over $220,000 and any unvested stock options. The social consequences were perhaps the most visceral. She became a pariah in the very kingdom she had once ruled.
Neighbors who had once vied for her approval now turned their backs, their electric golf carts silently veering to the opposite side of the street when she appeared. The HOA, now under new leadership, formally censured her and, citing a clause in the bylaws regarding conduct that brings the community into public disrepute, gave her a 90-day notice to sell her home and vacate the premises. The house, tainted by the scandal, sold for $2.05 million, a full $150,000 below its assessed market value, a final humiliating financial penalty. Meanwhile, Dr. Vance was seen on the evening news 3 weeks later, not discussing the incident, but unveiling a new data-driven community policing initiative designed to build trust and increase transparency. His composure during the incident had become legendary within the department, a real-world training example of de-escalation and professional integrity. His authority was not just affirmed, it was cemented in the public eye. The final audited tally of her single act of prejudice was staggering. Her position, her career, her home, her social standing, and a direct financial loss exceeding $478,500 when accounting for her settlement portion, lost salary, the loss on her home sale, and her newfound HOA dues. Her life was not just ruined, it was liquidated. The justice was not poetic, it was mathematical. Was it worth it to feel powerful for a few short minutes? Did she finally learn that the cost of prejudice is always, eventually, paid in full with interest? The official record offers no answer, only the cold, hard numbers of the receipt. Have you ever witnessed a case of karmic justice so thoroughly documented? Share this story with someone who needs to see it, and tell us in the comments about a time you saw prejudice get the consequences it deserved.